Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom. Tom, we're live. How's it going?
We are live. Thank you for letting me know. I was confused by the live big red thing in the upper corner. I was like, what does that mean? Was that like a let them live thing? I don't know. I'm so scared. Yes, apparently we're live. And apparently, Tony, it's week 2 of the college football playoff rankings reveal. And Tony, sometimes week 1 to week 2 is like, well, okay, we've already seen where these teams are, and week 2 is not that interesting. Tony, some stuff has happened since last we talked on one of these Tuesday live shows.
Indeed, two of the top four teams have lost. Top six, the number 6 Alabama has lost. So there's going to be some movement this week as we get set and watch along with the reveal on ESPN with all of you right now. If you're tuning in, programming note, Kevin Noon is not here tonight. He will be back next week unless he takes another day off. I don't know. Who's to say? But I am looking forward to seeing how this gets going. I see Reese Davis is playing into Election Day, which, we'll just leave it at that. And they show up there, the top 6. Tom, I am thinking as I look through all of this, and it's like, what's going to be the story? I'm wondering where LSU is, because that one spot below them is probably Alabama, and that's like, I think LSU is the bottom of the. I don't know. I don't want to say like the championship hopes or the teams that are going to have hopes to make the playoffs, because I think there are some one-loss teams that will be below LSU. But I'll just be interested to see where LSU is, how close they are to the undefeated teams, how many one-loss teams they're ahead of.
Yeah, that's one of those really interesting things because I think Clemson's going to really tumble. I think Clemson, the committee has sort of just been waiting for Clemson to lose, like some of those Florida State teams will, like 2014 Florida State, where they were just bad and just weird and off all season. And you were just waiting for them to lose so the committee could drop them. And they never lost, but then they went in as the, number 4 seed in the playoff, or the number 3 seed in the playoff, despite being the undefeated national champion or defending national champion, and then just got their clocks cleaned by Oregon in the Rose Bowl. So, I feel like that's sort of been how Clemson has been viewed all season, as a deeply flawed team. And I feel like they're going to drop a long way. They might drop to, they were 12th, I think, in both of the major polls. It wouldn't shock me if they dropped that much. Where is Alabama? Where is LSU? Because, are those teams still ahead of Oregon? Are those two teams still ahead of USC? That'll be kind of interesting to see, because, if a 2-loss Alabama is still ahead of USC, that tells me that USC has like no chance. It had Bill Bender on the Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning podcast, Bill Bender from the Sporting News, who, does this very, very closely, follows all this stuff very closely. And I asked him, like, what's the lowest team in week 1 rankings that you could see potentially having a legitimate path to the playoffs? He had an interesting answer, because I thought the answer might be LSU. He said North Carolina, which, you don't think of North Carolina as being really a legitimate national championship contender this year, but they only have 1 loss. They have a clear path to the ACC championship game. They have a beatable Clemson in the ACC championship game. And if they keep winning, and if they're a 1-loss ACC champion, depending on what happens in some other conferences, if the Ohio State Michigan game is a 17-point game instead of a 1-score game, if Alabama loses a 3rd game, if whatever you can have a bunch of, you have the bloodbath in the Pac-12 where Utah just beats everyone, and then everyone in Pac-12 has 2 losses. You could see a path for like a North Carolina to get there. I thought that was a really interesting, that's a team that I just they lost early and I sort of forgot about them. And then you look and it's like, oh, well, they're still here somehow.
I'm also interested to see where Tennessee is. They're 5th in both of the coaches and AP polls. And if they're at 5 now, they finished the season with Missouri, at South Carolina, and at Vanderbilt. The only way they would drop is, I think, conference champions moving ahead of them. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that that's a guarantee. Like North Carolina, for instance, would a 13 and 12-1 North Carolina ACC champ jump ahead of Tennessee and get into that playoff picture? Because if Tennessee is 5 right now, you're sitting on the outside looking in just in week 2. Like feels like Ohio State, Michigan that's going to perhaps open something up for them. So 5 seems a little high, seems a little aggressive for me for the committee for Tennessee. So I'll be interested to see where they are in this one. Just, I think the committee has to take it more seriously than the AP and the coaches do. So I'm not sure where they will be. What do you think?
Yeah, Tennessee is an interesting one because their resume took such a hit this weekend because their big shiny win was, look, we beat Alabama, and Alabama is one of the 6 best teams in the country. Well, then Alabama lost to LSU. And then, once you have a couple losses, then they almost lost to Texas A&M, and they almost lost to Texas. Those start looking a little different once you have a couple losses on the resume. Then it's not heart of a champion. Then it's crappy team that sometimes it scrapes past other crappy teams. And Alabama's not really a crappy team. That's obviously a little bit of an overstatement. But when you are a 2002 Ohio State was the heart of a champion because they won every game 14-10, it seemed like, for 14 games in a row. And then 2003 Ohio State, they were trying to win every game 14-10, except they lost to Wisconsin and they lost to Michigan. And all of a sudden you're not even, Ohio State was not in the national championship conversation and would not have been probably in the college football playoff conversation after losing to Michigan and having that be their second loss. So, Alabama, I think, is probably not going to get the benefit of the doubt this year. Tennessee, though, so your Alabama doesn't look so good. You also kind of got blasted by Georgia. That was not a competitive game. And Tennessee scored a late touchdown to make it look a little more respectable. But that was very much a 24-6, 27-6 kind of game for most of the game. They really, that was not a game where you watch it. Sometimes you watch a game between 2 top teams and it's like, you know what? I would be happy to watch that one again. That was not one of those teams. Tony, we have rankings.
We have rankings: 25 Washington, 24 Kentucky, 23 Florida State, 22 UCF, 21 Illinois, and welcome Florida State to the polls. Now that makes the loss, the LSU loss, look less bad because Florida State beat LSU. Hey, you can't fault LSU for losing to the number 23 team in the nation way earlier in the season. Illinois doesn't fall too bad, 5 spots from their spot at 16-21. So not terrible. They could have just killed those guys for losing that game, and I don't think anybody would complain. Here we go, 20, Notre Dame. They jump into the rankings from unranked. Kansas State drops from 6 all the way to 19. Texas is at 18. 17 is Tulane. 16, North Carolina State. We were wondering where Notre Dame would end up after that win over Clemson. You see them there at 20. That's a good win for Ohio State. That's something that Ohio State fans will want to continue to see happen. And with Notre Dame's schedule, with a win over USC, they'll jump up even more, but that's going to be interesting to watch. Texas, I think, is going to continue to climb. I think they beat TCU this weekend, so that will help them in the rankings.
They're favored over TCU. Yeah, they're favored over TCU by, I think, a few points. Yeah, if that, that's not as big a concern now that Alabama's maybe kind of sort of out of the picture. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's Texas at 18 feels like, that's a lot of respect for a 3-loss team. But, I mean, Texas, I think, is getting a lot of credit for almost beating Alabama. Notre Dame has a win over a North Carolina team that's ranked ahead of them. Oh, here we go. Here's the next
15
round.
Is North Carolina. 14 Penn State moves up a spot. 13 Utah. 12 UCLA. 11 Ole Miss. Ole Miss and UCLA stay where they were. Utah jumps up 1, and as I said, Penn State up 1 at 7-2. North Carolina is still behind a bunch of a couple of 7-2 teams there with Penn State and Utah. They'll be behind LSU. They'll be behind Alabama. So North Carolina still working their way up. People still not buying into the defense. Want to see North Carolina beat somebody of note. And I think the more they watch Drake May, they'll maybe be inclined to start to pay attention to them. But right now they're just they're off in the distance as everybody else maneuvers. And we'll see the Pac-12 shake out here eventually. And now number 10, Clemson, down 6 spots. That's I guess 10 is a little bit, we talked about maybe will they show up at 11, how far will they drop out? can't fault them here. I guess at 10, that's their only loss. It was an ugly loss though. Dropped
That was
6
a really
spots.
bad loss. I was surprised at how lopsided that loss was. I thought that was a possibility that they might got at Notre Dame, but that was, they just looked non-competitive in that game. And that's one of those things where, we talk all the time about what here's what the committee says they want to do, and here's what they really want to do. The committee does not want dog crap semifinal games. And, number 4 seeded Clemson against number 1 seeded Georgia is just begging for 38-3. And the committee does not want that. Clemson is shaky, but Clemson is also boring and shaky. And that is not a good combination for TV ratings.
And the defense has been up and down. You give up 35 or 21 or 28 to Notre Dame. There's some questions there. I don't know what the cause for a pause here is. Waiting on number 9. They're just can't believe what's happening to Clemson, I guess, as we have this on mute. Joe in the chat here, top 4 doesn't matter the order. If you're a contender, you'll have to play 2 games to win both regardless of matchup. 2019 disagrees with you there. Alabama at number 9 falls 3 spots. So that's
Alabama still ahead of Clemson is, first of all, that tells you Clemson is out. Like there's basically no way Clemson's making it. Because
Alabama's out. So
Alabama should be out. And you see them at number 9 and it's like, boy, they should be out. But number 8 USC. Number 8 USC. You're going to probably see number 7 Oregon, right? It's going to be number 7 Oregon or number 7 LSU. That's going to be honestly maybe the most interesting thing we see the rest of the way. Because it's going to be one of those teams 7, one of those teams 6, Tennessee 5. I think at this point, right?
You're going to be, I'm not going to be shocked to see Oregon here and LSU ahead of them. Because going to commercial? No, just going to Herb Street. Well, Tom, let's pin our ears back and talk about what we've learned here. Why are they? Oh man, they're holding back the top 7. It used to be let's just hold back the top 6.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's because there is drama here coming with the LSU, with TCU, with Tennessee in there, and where is everybody? If LSU is ahead of Oregon, I think Oregon is still, obviously they're still fine. They win out. I think they can make it, but an 11-2 LSU with a conference championship or a 12-1 Oregon, if they have LSU already ahead, then how does Oregon
and here's what's setting up. The Oregon-Georgia game is looming very, very large because if Oregon had not played Georgia, if Oregon just plays, Portland State week 1, they're undefeated right now. Everyone's looking at them and they're just boat racing everyone in the Pac-12. And it's like, wow, national championship contender Oregon. They've got that 49-3 on their record. And that is just, that's one of those stains that doesn't come out really. And it's been a long time and it's week 1 and you can and it was basically a road game and it's a new coach and it's all that stuff. But man, oh man, that is, and what's really going to be tough for them is if LSU's anywhere close to Oregon, even if LSU's behind Oregon, what does LSU have to do to get into the playoff? They've got to win the SEC, right? So who do they have to beat in the SEC championship game? They have to beat Georgia. So then you've got, we looked at the teams and they have a common opponent and one of them lost by 46 and one of them beat them. So to us, it was a clear, you can already hear it. Mm-hmm. So functionally, I don't know if it matters if LSU is one spot ahead or one spot behind Oregon right now. That's, if LSU wins out and it's, LSU and Oregon are jockeying for that 4th spot, that's going to be the deciding factor. I don't think there's any question in my mind on that.
Yeah, and it's an easy one to draw to and get the team that you feel is better. You just look at that one and you go there. Still waiting for this top 7 reveal. To address what I said with Joe on the chat here, the top 4 doesn't matter the order. If you're a contender, you'll have to play 2 games and win both regardless of the matchup. You do have to win 2 games, but in 2019, LSU only had to face Oklahoma and then Clemson. Ohio State had to go with Clemson. And as you see, Georgia there, the number one team in the rankings. That is not a surprise. That's why they went and showed that one first. That was expected. That's what we talked about last week. If they would beat Tennessee, they would jump Ohio State. So there's Ohio State at number 2. And of course, there's Michigan at number 3 as expected. And where are we going now? Dun, dun, dun. Or are we going to commercial?
Don't you? We have products to sell.
It is always interesting to see how they do this. Like, where is the drama? Let's save that. TCU at number 4.
TCU number 4. I mean,
there you go.
That's not
Throwing
a big surprise, I don't think. But I would imagine TCU fans are a little bit relieved that it is in fact them at number 4, because they have felt wronged by the playoff committee at times in the past, and that's. I think they probably deserve that until we see otherwise, right? I mean, we'll see how they do against Tennessee. We'll see how they do against Texas this weekend.
And there's Tennessee at number 5, dropping 4 spots as we await Oregon and LSU.
They're setting this up. They're setting this up for the big shocking reveal that LSU is ahead of Oregon. That's right. What this feels like. Because there's no reason to make 6 versus 7 the last thing. That
the only way it's dramatic is if
all of my TV producer bells are going off here that this is what this is about.
Or else there'd be no reason to
right. There's no reason. Yeah. Otherwise, the drama's at number 1 or the drama's at number 2 or whatever. The surprise comes at 6, and it's going to be LSU. I would bet.
And this,
but
a long, like I said, I don't think long drum roll. Yeah. No, I'm with you. And that's why they could actually just go ahead and put Oregon there, because it doesn't matter. They can go ahead and choose either one once they start to pit them ahead of together. But they should do that right now then also.
Yes.
But LSU doesn't have that win over Georgia yet, which is a very presumptuous win to give them, by the way. Let's go ahead and state that. Georgia playing the way they are right now. Boy, I bet there's some really good discussion going on this show. Or maybe they're all just waiting.
Do you think the committee's still debating who's 6? Do you think maybe that's the debate, the delay?
We've picked the 25. We just have this one issue that we can't quite. No, Tom. I think what they did is they filled out their ballots, but some of the Chads were hanging, and so they're examining where everything is. No, is that not?
No.
There you go, Oregon.
6 Oregon. All right. Well, so what the heck was that all about? Why
they
was that
needed drama? See, just because there is no drama doesn't mean you can't make drama, Tom.
This is the most reality TV thing.
So there you have it. LSU in at number 7. So again, top 4 of Ohio State or Georgia 1, Ohio State 2, Michigan 3, TCU 4. I think they can go ahead and put TCU there now. Right now, that's fine. I do think they're going to lose at Texas this week. I think TCU has been playing with fire in their 6 conference wins. The only one where they haven't been trailing in the fourth quarter or only ahead by 3 was the blowout against Oklahoma. Their last 5 games have all been close. And I think if you play with too much fire in Texas, in DKR Stadium there, you will probably I can't believe I'm throwing all my faith at the Texas Longhorns right now.
But I just think reliable Texas Longhorns. Yes. Yeah. Let's just run through the whole thing. We've got the graphic up on screen now. So 25 Washington, 24 Kentucky, 23 Florida State, 22 UCF, 21 Illinois, number 20 Notre Dame. That's a big jump after the big win over Clemson. That is a huge bullet in Ohio State's gun to have Notre Dame 20th. K-State falls to 19th after their loss. Texas all the way up to 18th. Tulane 17. NC State, Boo Corrigan's NC State 16. UNC 15. That's got a really chap Boo's that UNC is 1 spot ahead of them in his own rankings. Number 14 Penn State. Number 13 Utah. 12 UCLA. 11 Ole Miss. 10 Clemson. 9 Alabama. 8 USC. And then the big drama, 7 LSU, 6 Oregon, and then 5 Tennessee, 4 TCU, 3 Michigan, 2 Ohio State, 1 Georgia. Obviously there's there are plenty of games here that are going to get played between now and then. 2 and 3 in the current rankings are going to play in a couple weeks. 7 and 1 are very likely going to play in a couple weeks. 8 and 6 could very well play in a couple weeks. We know 12 and 8 are going to play in a couple weeks. I think does Ole Miss still have to play? I think Ole Miss has not played Alabama yet.
They have Alabama this week.
Yeah, they have Alabama this week. So yeah,
in Oxford.
Yeah, 9 and 11. Yeah. And Utah, I think Utah has a bunch of those ranked Pac-12 teams still to play. So yeah, there's a lot still that's going to change between, now and now in the rankings. But yeah, it feels like after last week, it feels like you've got a much better sense who's going to, where this is headed. You sort of got, Clemson was kind of hanging around, and you knew it wasn't going to last forever. But okay, they're functionally probably more or less out right now. It feels to me like we have a much better sense now than we did a week ago. Are you agree or disagree with that?
No, I'm with you there. In terms of Utah, they've already lost to UCLA. They are at Oregon next week as they try to stay in this. But I mean, if TCU wins out, obviously they're in, and they have a schedule that if they can get past Texas, and honestly, when I was looking at future schedules, I don't even know if I looked too far past Texas, but TCU, just the way they've been playing, I'm concerned about them. Tennessee, they're sitting with one loss, and their schedule is, as I said, Missouri, at South Carolina, at Vanderbilt. How do they not make it at this point? That's going to be. Is it how badly or how closely Ohio State or Michigan loses that game that keeps Tennessee at 5? And who does LSU or Oregon would jump Tennessee with a conference championship? Is that another way that Tennessee stays out at this point?
Yeah, that it seems like that. And, Tennessee doesn't really have any opportunities to really add to their resume. It's like the good news is you're not going to lose again. The bad news is you're not playing anyone who even gives you a chance to lose again. So you don't really have a chance to add to your resume. And the committee has already said Ohio State's resume right now is better than Tennessee's resume. So if Ohio State loses close to Michigan at home, if it's 30-27, then I don't think you can jump Tennessee 3 spots ahead of Ohio State. If Tennessee's, beating Vanderbilt that weekend, like, wow, congratulations, great job. And I don't know that you can jump Tennessee over Michigan if Michigan loses 30-27 in that game in Columbus. That feels, and we're ascribing a level of logical consistency to the committee that I'm not sure their body of work over the years has borne out, but it feels like if Georgia and TCU win out and Ohio State and Michigan play a very close game in Columbus, that maybe is your Final Four. And it's, the winner of Ohio State, Michigan plays TCU in the Fiesta Bowl, and Georgia plays the loser of Ohio State, Michigan in the Peach Bowl. There's a lot of ifs and maybes there.
TCU still has, they're at Texas this week, at Baylor, and then home against Iowa State. So it's not going to be an easy road for them. And if TCU loses, you look at Ohio State and Michigan, the loser of that one, now you've got some room to play in terms of who is going to move the loser of that one to 5. You're going to need a couple of teams to come in, and maybe that is Oregon and LSU at that point. But a 2-loss SEC champ, and now you're talking where is Georgia in that if LSU beats Georgia? So I don't even know that you can really factor LSU in at this point in this exercise, because if we're going to assume Georgia is there, we're going to assume the winner of Ohio State and Michigan is there. What 2 teams then keep the loser out again in a close, hard-fought, quality game? What 2 teams then would eliminate the loser of Ohio State, Michigan?
Yeah, it's hard to make a real compelling case for those, because, like I said, this is baked in. What has come, the murderous SEC schedule that Tennessee has to play, or that whoever has to play, like LSU, like that's already baked in. If you don't have another great win, to bolster your resume, I don't know that you can make a compelling case for them to jump, because who does LSU have left? I know they've got Arkansas at the end of the year.
It's at Arkansas, it's UAB, and at Texas A&M.
Yeah, I mean, what's your signature win there? I mean, like, congratulations, you beat the team that everyone thought was going to be good 4 months ago, but it's been garbage all year. There's just that's the thing. You have the reputation of the SEC, and the top end of the SEC is very good, but the middle of the SEC this year is just kind of not. A lot of the teams that were supposed to be, Kentucky, and Kentucky's been incredible. Well, I mean, Kentucky's ranked this week, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know who Kentucky has left on their schedule, but that's one of those. You look at the bottom of the rankings and go, aha, who is the committee trying to prop up here? Okay. Kentucky and Florida State being in down there, I don't know that those are really legitimately top 25 teams, but it feels like, if you're going to be logical about it, I don't think you can jump a Tennessee team that's not going to have a division title, not going to have a conference title, ahead of a, Michigan that lost close to at Ohio State. If Michigan is, if Michigan's already ahead of them, what's the case to jump them? And, Michigan, Tennessee, everyone saw, the committee tells us every week they watch all the games. I'm sure they watched the Georgia-Tennessee game. I'm sure they saw Tennessee down 27-6 with 5 minutes left in that game. And I'm sure they saw that was never really a game in the second half. So if Michigan-Ohio State is a game in the second half, and Michigan's on the road and it's a real close game, and I think I don't know that there's a compelling case to put them ahead of the loser of that game. John Alexander says he understands they can't put a 2-loss team ahead of a 1-loss team. Can they? Tony, they can't do that, can they? Have they already done that, Tony? Listen, it's possible. Maybe. Let's look at where Alabama is, or LSU.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And you look at where LSU is compared to USC, compared to Clemson, compared to Ole Miss, UCLA, North Carolina. When I'm asking who can jump into that top 4 and bump out an OSU Michigan loser, North Carolina, as you mentioned with Bill Bender talking about them, they've got that one loss. They're the kind of team that a committee wouldn't mind seeing, because they are explosive, unlike a Clemson, which is not, and maybe offense can make something happen, which is also why I still think Tennessee is a concern for anybody wanting to get into the playoffs, because just sitting there, they've got their loss, and it's to the best team in the nation, and that won't be the case for the Ohio State Michigan loser. They'll be losing to the second best team in the nation, which is very different. And so I think, are there any? I'm just trying to think if there are any transitive games in there, any common opponents, and generally between the SEC and the Big Ten there aren't. So it's difficult to find a matchup that would favor them. And I realize that, yes, they're ahead of Michigan and Ohio State are ahead of Tennessee now, but Tennessee has that loss, and they only dropped 5. I'm wondering would that have been the case for Ohio State or Michigan to only drop 5? Perhaps, losing to each other.
Who are they playing? If Ohio State loses at Northwestern, they're probably dropping more than 5. If Michigan loses at Rutgers, they're probably dropping more than 5. They lost to a good team. Mm-hmm. This is, they lost to a good team. So that's not, there's no great shame in losing to Georgia, but you're not the number 1 team in the country. You were very clearly not the number 1 team in the country if you lose by 3 touchdowns. So, here's one from Rick S. that I did want to get to, because I think this is one of these kind of sneaky important teams. He wants to know who Ole Miss lost to, and Ole Miss lost at LSU 45-20. That was on October 22nd. That's one of those games that just sort of slid under the radar. I think there was other stuff going on that weekend. Ohio State fans got to watch Iowa that weekend, so it was hard to take your eyes off that game. But they lost to LSU. They are off. They were off last week. They are at Alabama. No, sorry, they have Alabama at home this week, then at Arkansas, home for Mississippi State. They if LSU slips up between now and then, Ole Miss could potentially steal that Western Division, SEC Western Division spot. They would obviously have to beat Alabama this weekend. But LSU, you mentioned earlier, at Arkansas and at Texas A&M are their last two SEC games. So I don't think LSU loses. But if Ole Miss beats Alabama this weekend, first of all, Alabama may drop all the way to 10th with another loss. But it does feel like we may have, you may have at least a possibility of some SEC West drama. Oh boy, we've got a new guest. We have a very special guest. Look who it is. It's not Kevin Noon. What's the best news we can give you? It's not Kevin Noon. It's Marc Givler of BuckeyeHuddle.com. Marc, thank you for being here.
Oh, I'm getting to see what this is all about. So I'm looking forward to this.
You're welcome.
Yes. Thank you for this incredible opportunity for my career.
We are. Tony is going to have to hop off in 10 minutes or so for the college football or playoff conference call. We're going to answer a bunch of your questions so go ahead and throw those questions in the chat right now, because Marc and I will answer any questions you've got within reason. Let's keep it topical to college football, since there's nothing else going on in the world tonight. Let's just keep it on college football, but throw those questions in the chat. Marc and I will answer them. Marc, also one of our recruiting gurus at BuckeyeHuddle.com. So if you have recruiting questions for Marc, this was a great time to ask those as well. But Marc, did you get a chance to watch the rankings reveal previously?
Yes, I was watching, and nothing I don't think too shocking. I thought it was a little bit interesting that they did in fact go with TCU ahead of Tennessee. I wasn't sure what they would do with that one. So that was a little bit interesting to me. And gosh, it sure looks like Oregon losing by 46 points on a neutral field hasn't really hurt them as much as maybe you would expect it to. So that was kind of interesting as well.
I do think the Tennessee thing, when we're talking about why are they at 5, I don't know if there's anybody else to put there. And that's maybe why they are there. And maybe that's why they stay there when there are other teams to put at 3 or 4. And so I think maybe there's just who else would you put there? You're not going to put, I guess, Oregon there because Tennessee has a closer loss to Georgia. It's not going to be USC or anybody like that. So I guess at this point, and maybe old Boo will let us know, Boo Corrigan, and he'll be like, who did you want me to put there? Who are we supposed to put there? It's Tennessee. Now that doesn't mean that they can't move down further. If there are other teams that start to move up and it's like, well, who did we had nobody else to put there. So we put North Carolina there. So I think maybe Tennessee, obviously it's a great loss. That's a thing. But I also think maybe there's just nobody else at 5, which wouldn't be a shock because you look at this crazy season that we've already had and the fact that you've got 2 lost teams ahead of 1 lost teams and 1 lost teams that are like, yeah, but they're all like Illinois, so I don't think there's a lot of faith in USC, UCLA, those kinds of teams. And there's reason to have a little bit of faith in Tennessee, but I don't think as I think this out and look at it, I don't know that they only have one way to go. I think they have 2 ways to go as other teams finish off the season with some conference opponents that are quality.
Well, and I was with Tennessee, I thought they might even be 4. I didn't know if they would punish Tennessee to that extent, even with TCU. I mean, TCU's schedule not particularly strong at this point. I know they're going to play some catch up here with some of their later games, and possibly looks like they're in a pretty good spot to play in the Big 12 championship. So that'll increase for them. But I thought maybe they would make TCU earn it a little bit more, I guess, for lack of a better phrase.
Just keep teasing them.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, TCU is gonna. I mean, they're gonna earn it one way or the other, because TCU feels like one of those teams where if they lose, they're probably more or less out, because you're gonna, they're a little like Clemson, where they've been playing kind of close to a bunch of teams this year. They don't have that one signature win over a top 10 kind of team. If they beat Texas, Texas is high enough in the rankings right now that if TCU beats Texas probably stays in the rankings, and that might be enough to validate them to the committee. I was just trying to pull up the Big 12 standings right now to figure out who's actually going to play in the
good luck with that, Tom.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a mystery, because you've got TCU is 6-0, and then you have you've got Baylor, Texas, K-State all at 4-2. So if Texas If TCU wins, then Texas has a third loss. I think TCU and Baylor still have to play, I believe.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. So,
No, I'm sorry.
you know,
You're talking Big 12. Yep.
yeah. Baylor. So Baylor could have another loss. So, you know, it's going to be TCU, and then you get into there's a whole huge tiebreaker of, you know, there could be, if K-State loses another one, you're playing a 3-loss team, but which 3-loss team? And I think the answer is, does it matter?
There could be like a 5-way tie for that second team, and good luck with that tiebreaker. At some point, it's just going to be rock, paper, scissors, and good luck, Kansas. You actually make it, and it's very messy there. And as long as TCU keeps winning, it doesn't matter what happens below them.
I think they're done winning soon. I think Texas is going to beat them this weekend.
That's what I've been saying as well.
Really do.
It's in Austin. It's time for TCU to go down. As I said, they've been trailing in the fourth quarter of their last 5 games, or up by no more than 3 over their last 5 games in conference play, and so it's about time for them. It's been fun, even trailing last week, I think, against Texas Tech at home. Texas Tech being a 4-5 on the season. It's come on, do better.
Yeah, I like Texas next week. I think, and is LSU out of the woods? I mean,
at Arkansas,
they could
then
totally
UAB,
flop against Arkansas next week.
And Texas A&M at the end. Texas A&M kept it close with Alabama. What's going on? That's going to be Texas A&M's last game. Are they going to want to end the season on a high note so that they can keep some of their players from jumping into the transfer portal, or get some return on that NIL money? So I don't know that LSU is completely out of the picture yet, but they would have to be upset at this point. And we know Brian Kelly teams don't get upset.
Well, and here's the thing with LSU: they can probably get through the last 2 SEC games. Probably, I mean, we'll see. The week after a big win is always fun when you have to go on the road and play a team that's just kind of a pain in the butt like Arkansas. That's a little bit of a red flag to me. But even if they get through that, and if they get through Texas A&M at the end of the season, you're still going to have to beat Georgia, and you're going to have to beat Georgia in Atlanta. And that's, I know we just saw Alabama do that last year, but I don't think 2022 to LSU is quite 2021 Alabama. 2022 LSU, I think, is a pretty good team. It's a much improved team. I think it feels like they've sort of figured out an identity. Like they've sort of figured out what to do with, I'm going to screw up the former Arizona State quarterback. I always get him and the Kansas quarterback mixed up. Jaden Daniels. Yes. I always
Jake
screw those
Plummer.
two. Yeah. No, not Jake Plummer. No. It feels like they've kind of figured out what to do with Jaden Daniels a little bit. And that, when you were in LSU, you were in the sweet T belt. So you have access to lots of interior defensive linemen and big offensive linemen. And so you're always going to be kind of a tough out down there. And that's all well and good. I still don't think they're beating Georgia in Atlanta. So, they might be this wonderful story that they've come so far, and what an incredible first season from Brian Kelly, and then they lose by 17 points in the SEC championship game. That kind of feels like where this is headed.
Yeah, I'd agree. Before you talk, Mark, I'm going to go ahead and jump off, so I will let you guys go, and then I will be back shortly with all of the lies that the committee is spewing.
All right, so we'll just have Mark and I take over now. I want to go through some of these questions, because we got a million questions here. Let's see. Rick S says he'd rather be number 3. Let Michigan come in at number 2. I mean, I guess there's a certain argument for that. I guess it doesn't. I mean, functionally, it doesn't really matter to me. I don't expect motivation to be an issue this year for Ohio State in the Michigan game for a number of reasons, shall we say. But, I think the thing that's helpful there is that's the committee telling you right now they view Ohio State as just a little bit better than Michigan. Their resume is a little bit better than Michigan. Now, if Michigan loses to Ohio State, or if Ohio State loses to Michigan, then guess what? Michigan's going to jump Ohio State. And there's obviously no argument against that. But that also means that they view as being a little bit more of an air gap between Ohio State at number 2 and TCU at number 4, Ohio State at 2, Tennessee number 5. Tennessee's not going to be able to bolster their resume much. Ohio State's not really going to bolster their resume much. But, if Notre Dame keeps winning, if Penn State keeps winning, those teams are going to keep climbing. So, I think and if Illinois doesn't blow another game, they're probably going to stay in the top 25 after the Big Ten championship game. So that gives whoever wins the Big Ten championship game an extra top 25 win. I mean, to you, Mark, is the value of having the motivational edge of the nobody believed in us, where Ohio State's 3 and Michigan 2, is that big of an advantage? Or would you rather, if you were an Ohio State person, would you rather have it the way it is?
Yeah, I don't think 2 versus 3's too big of a deal. I mean, maybe the Vegas line, if somehow Michigan was favored, that may play into it. But bottom line, if Ohio State's not motivated for this one, there are some serious systemic issues at play with the program after what happened last year in Ann Arbor. So I don't think the motivation card is one that really needs to be played too heavily this year. I think that's going to be pretty organic just after everything that happened last year and just an off season of talking about, basically having their manhood taken from them the way Michigan won that game. So I would certainly hope that they're able to find the motivation without the committee stoking the flames.
Yeah, and next one from Nicholas says, this week is actually far more sensible than last week. So I'm going to see if I can. I'm going to punch up last week's top 6, and I'm with you there. And I'm not just with you because 3 of the 6 say lost next to them, because that's what happened last week. And if 3 of your top 6 lose, and 2 of them were 2 teams not in your top 6, well, that means you probably did not do a great job week 1. So I don't expect 3 of the top 6 to lose this week. It does, it feels like we have a better handle on things right now, where, I don't think TCU is really the 4th best team in the country, but I think you can make a rational argument for having them number 4. And I think, you've got, if you look at this week's rankings, I think it aligns a little more closely with what you've seen on the field. Alabama last week, Clemson being ahead of Michigan made no sense to me last week. Alabama being where they were last week was kind of like, you're sort of paying respects based on previous seasons, which is not something they're typically supposed to be doing. So I'm with Nicholas here. This feels much more, like maybe we're going to have a little bit of stability here from week to week. You're not going to have kind of the big question marks. Although I'm with you. I think TCU loses to Texas.
I got crushed for I did my instant observations after the games and after every Ohio State game. And earlier in the season, I had Michigan 3 ahead of Alabama, and I got kind of crushed for it. So no, it's too early for that. But can we talk about for a minute though with Alabama? Can we talk about them returning a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, a generational defensive end, portaling their way to a couple of receivers, portaling their way to one of the best running backs in the country, maybe one of the top 2 or 3 running backs in the country, having experience on defense, and basically being out of the playoffs already.
Yeah, that is wild.
Like,
and
Saban's the GOAT, but this was not his best effort so far. I mean, maybe they can win out and all sorts of hell will break loose and I'll be, eating crow here in a month. But boy, out after the first weekend in November is not exactly how I envisioned this when the season kicked off.
Yeah, and there have been plenty of people who have basically the gif of whoever that is, like smiling, and then the Undertaker shows up behind him. Like, that's been Nick Saban with all sorts of online take meisters for 10 years now, who couldn't wait to proclaim the end of the Saban dynasty. And it's like, I'm still not there yet. This team feels like, unless something crazy happens, and you need LSU to lose to, either Arkansas or Texas A&M, and you need Ole Miss. Alabama needs to beat Ole Miss, and then Alabama has to beat Georgia. And it's maybe all of that stuff can happen, but that's asking a lot at this point. And if that doesn't happen, then you need Ohio State to lose to Maryland, or Michigan to lose to Illinois, and then and Michigan loses to Illinois, and then Michigan beats Ohio State, and maybe you get some argument that you leave the Big Ten out or something. It just feels like you need so much to get Alabama in there that feels very unlikely at this point. So yeah, I'm shocked that this has not come together. There's just so much talent there, but are you sold on Bill O'Brien and Pete Golding as coordinators? Because it feels like there's just when you have that much talent, and it hasn't just been like, well, they had the one slip up. They've lost twice. They almost lost to Texas. They and may very well have lost to Texas if Quinn Ewers doesn't get hurt. They almost lost to Texas A&M. I mean, they are kind of fortunate to not be 5-4 right now. That's not out of the realm of possibility. And again, I am not saying the Nick Saban dynasty is dead. That's, we're not there yet. But this is, I was not expecting this to be the year where, you remember the year that, what was it, 2018, 2017, where they, it was 2019, I think, where they went to the Citrus Bowl and just annihilated Michigan State. It was like 49-3 in the Citrus Bowl, and it wasn't that close. Because they have no business being in the Citrus Bowl, but you just have one of those weird dysfunctional years where stuff breaks wrong, and you end up in the Citrus Bowl, and then you get to hang 49 points on some poor Big Ten team.
Yeah, it's shocking.
Yeah,
there are more Saturdays than not this year where they've looked bad. I mean, they have not looked good on more than maybe 2 occasions. This year. It's just, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I mean, I've watched a lot of their games this year. I don't think they protect particularly well up front, which is kind of strange given all the great linemen they've produced recently. But again, the defense should be better than it is, of course, with all they have coming back. And I think the NFL draft is still going to be very kind to their roster this spring. So it's a head scratcher, but I think it goes to kind of show, like, again, you talk about 2 things at play here. You talk about one, you talk about guys who, Ohio State went through this in 2015. Why is Will Anderson playing college football? And Ohio State had to deal with this in 2015 where they won it so young. It's like, why is Zeke Elliott playing college football this year? And it showed on the field. They were sleepwalking through most of the season. And I think there's some of that going on with Alabama. And then again, portal giveth and portal taketh away a little bit. I mean, you can go get these guys, but you still have to mesh them into a team. So, I think there's some of that too with just the free agency we're dealing with right now. But this was not my pick for, when we looked at like the early season rankings, that was not my, if you would have said, okay, which of these top 5 or 6 teams is going to kind of flop this year, Alabama would not have been my pick.
Yeah. Odysseus says Utah will wreck the Pac-12. I just want to run through the rest of Utah's schedule. They lost to UCLA and beat USC earlier this year. The remaining schedule, they play Stanford this weekend. They go at Oregon next week, and then Colorado. So they'll win 2 of those 3. We have seen them beat Oregon twice in 2 weeks last year. I mean, that was that, and neither of those games were close. So that'll be real interesting to see. Because if they beat Oregon, USC and UCLA are going to play. So one of them is going to have a second loss, and then the winner of that is going to play probably Oregon. Yeah, they would still play Oregon because only one of Oregon's losses is out of conference. Only one of Utah's losses out of conference. So then Utah would have the tiebreaker over Oregon. So then Utah would play the winner of UCLA, USC. Look at me working at Pac-12 tiebreakers in my head. So Utah could wreck the Pac-12. They could give 2 of the 3 remaining 1-loss teams a second loss and, completely knock them out. That is entirely possible. I could absolutely see that happening. Ohio State fans, I think gained in appreciation for the Utah program. At the Rose Bowl last year, I mean, covering that team, that is a super impressive team. It's just a very, very well-run program that has just sort of flown below the radar. They've just been very good, but not quite great for so much of the last 10, 12, 15 years. I mean, going back almost to the Urban Meyer era, they were unbeaten and they played Pitt in the Fiesta Bowl. And then they were, I think, unbeaten again or had a one loss. And they played Alabama and beat Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. And the story coming out of that was, well, Alabama didn't want to be there. And it's like, maybe Utah is just pretty darn good.
Yep. Yeah. I agree with the sentiment. That doesn't even necessarily have to be Utah necessarily. I think the Pac-12 is set up very well to cannibalize itself a little bit. Look, Oregon plays 3 games down the stretch here that they could lose. I'm not saying they're going to lose all 3. They may not even lose any of them, but they could lose to Washington. They could lose to Oregon State. They could lose to Utah. Those are all losable games. There isn't a game there. They're not playing, they already played Colorado. They got Cal. They got their gimmies out of the way. Their schedule is very much backloaded. So Oregon's on upset alert 3 straight weeks. So someone could get them before the conference championship game. USC has to play. USC and UCLA have to play each other, but USC also has to play Notre Dame.
Yep.
So there are endless opportunities here for the Pac-12 to produce a 2 or 3 loss conference champion, which is, they're done at that point. So it's interesting. I don't think we're all the way there yet, but the last 2 weeks, people are probably going to let the comments go nuts on me here. But the last 2 weeks, we are trending toward a Big Ten SEC invitational.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are trending toward Georgia versus loser Ohio State, Michigan, and winner Ohio State, Michigan versus Tennessee. I think that's. Yeah, I have for years and years kind of rolled my eyes at because there's always, and Tony's on the call right now, but there's always, and I'm not even going to name who it is, but there's a national reporter who will always, is this the year 3 SEC teams? No, it's never the year that 3 SEC teams take the tournament. That's not going to be what it is. But you just start going through the conferences. There's only 5 conferences. There's no unbeaten group of 5 conference teams. So there's not going to be a Cincinnati this year. The best group of 5 team is probably Tulane, and they're not going to make it. So there's only 5 power conferences. We just said that there's only one Big 12 team with fewer than 2 losses. That's TCU. TCU probably has to survive Texas. They have to survive Baylor, and then they have to play someone in the Big 12 championship game. Odds that they win those 3, odds that they win out are probably, less than 40, 30%. I mean, just even if you're 50-50 to win 3 games, your odds of winning all 3 of them are 12.5%. So you got a 1 in 8 shot. If you're 50-50 to win 3 different games, you got a 1 in 8 shot of winning all 3 of them. Pac-12, we just talked about, the Pac-12 banner carrier right now, even if the, Donner Party Pac-12 thing doesn't happen like it tends to every year, the big banner carrier in the Pac-12 lost by 46 points in week 1. So yeah, they've been better since then, but it's not like they have a flawless resume. And then in the ACC, Clemson just lost in a non-competitive way, lost to Notre Dame, where Notre Dame is okay, but not great. And Notre Dame also has a win over the other potential ACC championship team in North Carolina. So Notre Dame now has wins over both of those 2 teams, and Ohio State has a win over Notre Dame. So there's just so many, and so now we've gone through 3 conferences where you could make an argument that they're potentially out or 1 loss away from being out, and then you only have 2 conferences left, and you've got 2 really strong contenders at the top of either of those. And the SEC has 3 pretty strong contenders, but they're not going to get all 3 in because you're not going to get Georgia and Tennessee and LSU. So I think
it feels, I don't know if it's 50-50 yet that it's an SEC Big Ten thing this year, but it's probably more than 20%, which, we're still a few weeks away. And if you have certain results fall in a certain way, you could end up way north of 50% if you're, heading into championship weekend. It almost, you can, there's a scenario where you could almost say it would be, you would need Illinois to upset the Big Ten East champ for that to not happen. There's a certain sequence of games that can happen where you could be almost locked into that if Ohio State and Michigan play a close game and you have a bunch of the other teams lose. It was like Tony was saying earlier, that's not the number 5 team in the country. Well, okay, who's the number 5 team in the country? And you start looking around, it's like, maybe there isn't, like, rank 6 through 10. Like maybe you just rank 1 through 5 and then you skip to number 11 because there may just not be a 6 through 10 this year. Here's a good question. How is Kentucky ranked? Let's run through Kentucky's resume. Wins against Miami of Ohio, at Florida, Youngstown State, a 8-point win over Northern Illinois, a 10-point win over Mississippi State, and a 4-point win at Missouri. They lost to Ole Miss. They lost to South Carolina, a 44-6 loss at Tennessee. I know everyone who's down in the 20s is going to have flaws, but what is it about Kentucky in that resume that makes you think this is a top 25 team?
Yeah, I think you kind of said it. They got to put 25 teams in the top 25. I think this is one of those years you'd like to cut it off at about 15. But I think when they beat Florida, I think people thought Florida was good. And for some reason, they haven't been able to, come around on the idea that Florida's not very good. So I think, it's kind of when you beat certain teams and it gets stuck in people's heads, like, oh, that Florida, that's a really nice win for Kentucky. Well, no, not really. So I think it's just kind of one of those things where, and we've gone through this with the Notre Dame win for Ohio State. People were laughing, oh, Notre Dame, that's a terrible, so long, quality win for Ohio State. It's like, well, Notre Dame's essentially the ACC champion this year. Yep. Clemson, North Carolina, and they beat Syracuse. Mm-hmm. So things, people can't get out of their heads, kind of when the games are played. And again, if you beat Florida early, that's somehow this great win. But if you shuffle a schedule around and they beat Florida, next week, people aren't giving them as much credit for that. Yeah,
that's a really good point, because that's sort of how it works a lot of years. You have 9 SEC teams ranked preseason, and then all the wins are quality wins, and everyone is it's the old right. Garrison Keeler. It's Lake Wobegon where everyone's above average. That's the SEC. Everyone's great. Everyone is tremendous. Somehow everyone goes 10-2 every year. How is it possible? Listen. We don't do math down here. We just do football. Super chat from Philip Julio. Donner Party Pac-12. That is the best description I've ever heard of the Pac-12 conference. And that's the thing with the Pac-12. It is a conference where they will have good teams, but just top to bottom, it's a little like the Big 12 this year, where top to bottom, they don't have the terrible, terrible teams. They'll have, you'll have Arizona sometimes, or Colorado is bad this year, but the middle class of the Pac-12 is pretty good. And the upper class of the Pac-12 is not quite they don't have the Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, you want to throw Tennessee in there. Okay. They don't have that level of team. So if you're not the head and shoulders above everyone else team, you are going to get got at some point if you're playing teams where, even if you're 70% likely to beat a team any week, play 2 teams where you're 70% likely to win, you are now 49% likely to win those two games together. So it adds up pretty quickly, and that's why you have not seen a Pac-12 team in the playoff since 2016, right? Washington, 2016 was the last Pac-12 team to make the playoff. Am I forgetting anyone? I don't think I am.
Sounds right off the top of my head.
Yeah.
The Pac-12
I think it was Oregon 14 and Washington 16, and then every year since then, they just the Pac-12 championship game is just perpetually 10-2 Oregon against 9-3 Arizona or Utah, or it just every year it's Arizona State, whatever it is. it's just always number 9 against number 18 every single year, and it just that you're not gonna get yourself into the playoff that way. Brett wants to know why. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was gonna say they're the anti-SEC too. I mean, if you look at I'm not saying there's a conspiracy here that weird's going on, but it's just the way things work out. How often in November are there games in the SEC or even into the SEC championship game? And it's boy, if this result happens, that's really going to help the SEC get 2 teams into the college football playoff. And like clockwork, they get the result they need. It never fails. The SEC gets every result it needs. I'm not saying anyone's tanking for the betterment of the conference. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying they're on a very, very hot streak of getting the right results at the right times. And the Pac-12 is the opposite of that. Every time the Pac-12 pushes someone toward the front of the pack, Washington steps up and beats them by 30 or something. And it just, I don't know. They're not as cohesive, I guess, as the SEC when it comes to, getting the helpful results for the playoff rankings. I'll just put it that way.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, I'm not saying there's a massive conspiracy to rig games to benefit the long-term financial future of the SEC. However, if that was the case, this is a lot like what it would look like. Am I hearing you correctly there?
That's about right.
Yeah. Well, Pac-12 officials can't remember how many downs there are, or when to start and stop the clock, or any of the other very basic functions of their job. So yeah, rigging games is probably well beyond their abilities. Brett wants to know, why is there such a discrepancy between Ole Miss and Illinois? That is one hellaciously, quote unquote, good 25-point loss to LSU. And, let's just run through Ole Miss's schedule, just because I'm sure people are not familiar. And I know this is always super compelling, but this is the kind of minutia that you kind of have to look at to sort of understand where things are with certain teams. Ole Miss has a win over Troy, Central Arkansas, at Georgia Tech, Tulsa, Kentucky, at Vanderbilt, Auburn. They lost at LSU, and then they won at Texas A&M. That's their resume. And so their resume is Troy, who's bad, Central Arkansas, who's FCS, Georgia Tech, who fired its coach, Tulsa, who's probably going to fire Philip Montgomery, Kentucky, who's, quote unquote, number
good,
24.
apparently.
We talked about them earlier. At Vanderbilt, who is a mess, Auburn, who fired their coach, at LSU, they lost by 25 points, and at Texas A&M, which probably would have fired its coach if it didn't owe him $95 million. So, yeah, I don't think Illinois is particularly great this year. And, Illinois has now lost 2 games that Illinois should not have lost, but there's some, where's the beef there? Cause they still, they'll play Alabama this weekend, and they'll either be in, they'll either prove it or not this weekend, but still have at Arkansas and Mississippi State. That's just, for a team in November who's an 11th ranked team in the almighty SEC West, that is not a real impressive list of wins.
No, and they're almost 2 touchdown dogs. They're 2-score dogs at home to Bama. So Vegas doesn't particularly care for them either. God, and they needed Kentucky was down there at the goal. Levis fumbled, right? The goal, wasn't there a strip sack in the red zone in there at the very end? Kentucky was going down to win. Right.
That sounds right. That's one of those games that I don't remember. Win, I don't remember that game. That was one I don't remember. That was October 1st, so I don't remember where we were.
I'm almost positive Kentucky was down.
We were probably watching Rutgers. That's why. Yeah. I was too busy watching Rutgers to take in that game. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure Levis had them down there, and there was a strip sack at the end. Preserve that one. So yeah, again, I go back and I look and I just, what's the difference between 10 and 25 this year? Not a whole lot. I think, we've seen a lot of chaos already. I think we're going to see more. I think we talked about the Pac-12. We've talked about TCU, who I think is going to lose this weekend. Could Wake Forest beat North Carolina? That's very possible. Yeah. And then could, Clemson's not immune to losing another one. Clemson's got a couple games left that they could lose. And then I continue to look at, again, and we'll see what Notre Dame does against USC. We'll see if they can pull that one off too. But the level of insulation, I think Notre Dame supplies Ohio State. And maybe by extension, even a little bit Michigan is I think is significant. I think again, if let's say Ohio State and Michigan play a 31-28 game. I don't care, whoever you think, whoever wins that, but it's 31-20. It's a field goal game. And even if Clemson runs the table, you're going to put Clemson in? You're going to put Clemson in over, like if Ohio State loses 31-28 to Michigan on a last-second field goal, and Ohio State beats Notre Dame by 2 scores, Notre Dame dominates Clemson, dominates North Carolina, beats Syracuse, dominates that entire conference this year. So Ohio State's got a win against a team who, for all intents and purposes, was the best team in the ACC this year. And they'll have the win against maybe a 10-2 borderline top 10 Penn State. Yeah, you're going to put Clemson in over Ohio State, and you can. I'll make the same argument for Michigan, although Michigan's again a little less insulated because of their non-conference schedule. But Michigan plays on the road against Ohio State, loses on a last-second field goal. You're going to put Clemson in over them. You're going to put maybe like a one-loss TCU in, who Texas will beat by 20 points this Saturday. I don't see that happening. And so I continue to look at Notre Dame as an insulator for the Big Ten, especially Ohio State. And I just think it's going to be very, very interesting to watch this. Certainly there are scenarios that could play out that would throw that off. If TCU just runs the table, if USC just runs the table, beats Oregon in the process, looks really good doing it. There are scenarios I think that take this out of play, but I'm feeling really good right now. If I'm a Big Ten or SEC, one of the top dogs in the Big Ten or SEC right now, I'm feeling pretty good. I mean, even if I have a loss or if I take one down the stretch here.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just threw up the graphic with the rankings because right there on the screen is the committee telling you a one-loss Clemson is not getting in over a one-loss Michigan that loses close at Ohio State, or a one-loss Ohio State that loses close to Michigan. If the resumes were even comparable right now, Clemson would not be 8 spots behind Ohio State and 7 spots behind Michigan. That is the committee telling you, bye, you're done. So, it's like the gif of the, now I forget what movie it's from, but this guy just looks and goes, well, bye. That was the committee saying that to Clemson this week. That's it. Like, you have no argument. And, there is Ohio State having a win over Notre Dame, and Notre Dame having decisive wins over both North Carolina and Clemson, means there's functionally, they look at head-to-head. If it's a close decision, they look at head-to-head results or comparable results. This is something they talk about on the call all the time. And Tony will be back off the call in just a minute, so we'll get sort of the the nuts and bolts of what the committee had to say about some things when he's back on shortly. But one of the things they'll look at is common opponents. And if Ohio State has an 11-point win over Notre Dame, and Notre Dame just clobbered Clemson, and Notre Dame has clobbered North Carolina, there's really not much argument there for either of those teams to be ranked ahead of Ohio State. So I just don't see that happening. They
have wins over the top 3 teams in the ACC.
Yeah, and that's and the fact that that Syracuse is one of the top 3 teams in the ACC is also a little bit
right, and needed a borderline miracle to beat Purdue.
Yeah. So we are going to bring Tony back in right now. There he is. There's our special boy. Tony, what kind of lies did the committee have to share with us tonight? You're muted.
Tom, it's interesting. Earlier you were talking about how this all seems to be falling in line and everything seems to be cut and dry. And sadly, I didn't hear a lot of blatant lies because there's really nothing to lie about right now. I mean,
I'll give it time.
Yes, that will happen. But as I was, jotting notes, I posted perhaps the best question of the day when because there's some discussion about Tennessee and Oregon comparing their loss to Georgia, and somebody from the Tennessee region called in to say, when you're looking at these losses, do you factor in that Tennessee, when they were up by 3-0 over Georgia and there was rain. So, and of course, Book Oregon's like, we look at all of it. Game is 60 minutes. But it was also interesting. Earlier, Boo said the committee views both that loss, the Tennessee loss and the Oregon loss, as one-sided games. So like they realize that game wasn't actually a 14-point game. It was one-sided. And frankly, it doesn't matter that Tennessee had a 3-0 loss or 3-0 lead in the first quarter of that game.
Tony, you got to remember, Northwestern had a 7-0 lead on Ohio State. Should Northwestern be like number 22 this week? Maybe. I don't know. Who's to say? Tony, should the Wind be ranked this week? My column.
Well, certainly top 17 at least. But in terms of Ohio State and Michigan is still, the non-conference schedule is still holding them back, and it will in comparison with Ohio State until those two teams play. What went into the decision to keep Tennessee at number 5? Basically, it's the wins over Alabama, LSU, and Kentucky. You know, we do value wins, was what Boo Corrigan said, and Tennessee has 6 wins over 500 teams, so that's why they were ahead of Tennessee there. And also mentioned that Georgia's defensive play against Tennessee was incredibly impressive. So they really like Tennessee, or they really like Georgia. And the fact that they really like Georgia means they can only drop Tennessee so far, basically, for losing on the road at Georgia against a team that they really, really like.
Was there any kind of questions about if, a team like Tennessee, who does not have any good opponents left? I mean, they really, no disrespect to their bad opponents, but they don't have any good opponents left on the schedule. Was there any conversation about how, what kind of opportunities do teams have to add to their resume if they don't have a marquee game coming up?
There may have been a question asked in a terribly roundabout way relating to that, but the answer is always, we don't project. So basically next week, they'll just look to see what teams have done at that point, and Tennessee will be viewed as the same Tennessee team this week, except for what they have done that week and what the teams that they are basing their resume on have done. So they won't look necessarily, Tennessee has no way of moving up, so let's keep an eye on teams that do have an opportunity to move up. They'll just view it 1 week at a time, kind of in a weekly vacuum, if you will. So, the Tennessee is going to be what it is at the end of each week, and everybody else will be what they are. And then if Tennessee isn't playing that 13th week or that 14th week, then that's going to be a data point that is missing for them that can cost them.
What happens when LSU runs the table and beats Georgia in the SEC championship?
That is the best discussion of all of this, because they're not going to say boo about that, so to speak. But yeah, it creates issues all over the place. And, because are you leaving Georgia out? No, you're not going to leave Georgia out unless if it's a blowout. Do you still leave Georgia out? And then it's like, well, shoot, a team that can blow out Georgia, like, that must be really good. So can you really fault Georgia for being blown out by a team that can blow out Georgia? Of course you can't do that. So, but then you also can't go the manufacturing, the maneuvering of where these two SEC teams that are going to be in the playoffs. I've seen projections where it's like Georgia at 1 and Tennessee at 4 or something like that. It's like, there's no way they're going to make the two SEC teams play in the first round, I believe. And so, just LSU getting in there is going to create some issues that I don't think the rest of the nation wants to see. I don't even know if the committee wants to see it.
Yeah, and that feels like you have to have. Yeah, it feels so unlikely that this is probably us worrying about something in advance when football tends to resolve a lot of these things. We were talking before you hop back on. It's like, boy, there's so many Pac-12 teams right near the top of and it's like, well, if you look at how many teams they have to play, all these teams are playing each other in the next few weeks. Like, this is all going to sort itself out. It is interesting to me that Michigan, which got out of the contract they had with UCLA this year, UCLA, if they had played UCLA, first of all, they would beat UCLA. And second of all, that would be a signature win for them. That would be a ranked win for them. And instead they played this terrible non-conference schedule, and that's holding them back. If Michigan had not done that, I think there's an argument that Michigan is ranked ahead of Ohio State because they have another ranked win. They don't have that terrible non-conference schedule holding them back. That's one of those things that, at the time it was kind of like, oh, well, that's a weird thing to cancel a series, but that feels like that might be one of the things that, Ohio State and Michigan are obviously going to settle on the field, but that could be the difference between Michigan, potentially, if Michigan is in that 4-5 debate with Tennessee and, Ohio State's in and maybe TCU's in. That could be the thing that forces them out. That could be the difference, which is crazy.
Well, they paid 1.5 million, I believe, to get out of the UCLA series, then paid 1.8 million for Hawaii to play them, and then like 1.8 million or something for maybe East Carolina next year. And so, yeah, Mark, they could have paid like $4 or $5 million to end up getting passed for that number 4 spot by Tennessee, because their signature win is Penn State, and their non-conference schedule, the committee does not like it, and they continue to refer to it when asked, hey, what is it with Michigan and Ohio State? And it's like, well, the non-conference schedule is the big thing right now. So I think they can get away with it, but also it could come back to haunt them here.
Yeah, and I think you had just stepped away to take the teleconference, and I kind of mentioned to Tom, I said, we're not all the way there yet, but the last couple of weeks, and I think what's going to happen, especially with what's going to happen the next 2 weeks, kind of given who some of these teams like Tennessee, Ohio State, Michigan are playing these next 2 weeks, things are trending toward a Big Ten SEC invitational.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Michigan is the one team that, if they lose a close game to Ohio State, Michigan would be the one team in that type of scenario that it would be really tough to find the really quality wins there. And so we were mentioning that if they had just had a little bit better of a non-conference schedule, I think they could go to Columbus, lose by a score, and squeeze in there at the 4 seed, given what has been happening the last 2 weeks, and given what I think is going to continue to happen in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Well, when they look at Michigan, and this is assuming a Michigan loss to Ohio State, and you look at their Big Ten play, and their average score at halftime is a 14-10 slug fest. And it's, you turn it on in the second half, but if the committee is looking at all 4 quarters, they're not going to miss the first 2 quarters and be dazzled by the second 2 quarters. So a win solves everything, obviously, but you can't necessarily go into this thinking about wins, because how many teams with 1 loss have made the playoffs? Over half, I think. Yeah. And so if you prepare for that, then you'll have a better option, better plan than you don't. Like Michigan right now, it's almost like they've gone Tressel ball with their scheduling. Not that Jim Tressel would have a weak schedule, but if you trip up, then there's no plan after that. That's Jim Tressel football. If the offense screws up or there's a big play, you have no answer for that, because you've just you've lost your edge there. And so Michigan, if they trip up, they have, if your redeeming win is Penn State, and I don't know what Penn State's remaining schedule is, I can't imagine it's all that tough. So even if they end up 10-2, that's great. But Penn State loses to the 2 quality teams that they play. How good are they? Yeah,
and Penn State is definitely they have played Ohio State and Michigan, so they don't have much left on their schedule in the Big Ten East. What's left for them is Maryland this week, at Rutgers, and then Michigan State. So 2 rivalry games, and then also a rivalry game. So you got to throw the records out when they play those three historic rivals. Yeah, that's a Penn State team that should finish 10-2 unless something really stupid happens. But you're probably also topping out at about 10 or so in the ranking, something like that. I don't know that Penn State. I mean, I think the only way Penn State is like a clear-cut New Year's Six team is if both Michigan and Ohio State make the playoff. I think there's a possibility Penn State, if Michigan, say Ohio State beats Michigan, and then Michigan goes to the Rose Bowl, Penn State, maybe they play in something stupid like the Cotton Bowl against Tulane or something like that, but I don't think that's a complete given. They're probably ahead of Illinois, but yeah, I don't really see that. Lisa wants to know, how many ranked wins does Ohio State currently have? The answer is 2, correct? Because it's Notre Dame and Penn State. I'll pull up the current rankings real quickly here. Ohio State has wins over number 14 Penn State, number 20 Notre Dame. I would think that both of those numbers might get better as that might be number 10 Penn State. And if Notre Dame beats USC, that could be like number 14 Notre Dame before all is said and done. And, you would potentially have a win over Michigan, which is, still probably a top 5, top 4 kind of win on Selection Sunday. And potentially, if Illinois doesn't do something stupid between now and Illinois is going to lose to Michigan. So Illinois probably would not be a ranked win in the Big Ten championship game, probably, but you might be close. Michigan's ranked wins are Penn State. I'm just zipping through here. Does Michigan have a second ranked win, or is it just Penn State? I think it's just Penn State.
Penn State, because Connecticut is 26, I believe.
Missed it by that much.
So somebody called and asked about Clemson dropping to number 10. Was that because you overvalued Clemson, or was this a response to how they looked against Notre Dame? And yes, Boo's gonna be like, yeah, no, we were totally wrong about, the committee was totally wrong about Notre Dame, Clemson. Of course, it was about how they looked against Notre Dame. What are you, an idiot? Yes, that was based on the game against Notre Dame. There was another question that I have to find here. We could talk about this question here if you want, Tom, as I look for it.
Yeah, it's just me. Tim says, how about number 1 Ohio State versus number 4 Michigan, a rematch? Mark, I know they see the teams, and there's no chance that they're, they don't take anything else into account. They're just going to see the teams, and whoever's number 1, whoever's number 4. Do you see any chance that they're going to put number 1 Georgia versus number 4 Tennessee, or number 1 Ohio State versus number 4 Michigan, or number 1 Michigan versus number 4 Ohio State, or whatever? I mean, I think Georgia being a clear-cut number 1, unless they lose in the SEC championship game. I mean, there's a lot would have to happen for this to come to pass. But Tony and I think, have a long-standing theory on this show that no matter what they say they're going to do, they're not going to just immediately create a SEC versus SEC rematch, or a Big Ten versus Big Ten rematch in the first round. What do you think? Could this happen?
No, yeah, they'll find a way to get them in opposite semis. I can kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone here, because I saw a comment right above that about there's no way that the loser of the Ohio State Michigan game gets in over Tennessee, and that there it is. And I would tend to agree with that, but TCU is going to lose. I'm like fully convinced of that. I fully convinced it's going to happen this Saturday. And at that point, this becomes pretty simple. The loser of the Ohio State Michigan game, assuming it's close, it's competitive, falls to 4, plays Georgia. Winner of the Ohio State Michigan game plays the 2-3 game versus Tennessee. There you go. Ohio Big Ten SEC Invitational. There you go. That's how it happens.
It
Tony,
makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Go ahead, Tom.
Fantastic question from Mateo and Fuego, and then we're going to follow up with Bo Jingle Bells. 3-0 lead. This is in reference to Tennessee having a 3-0 lead over Georgia. Didn't Miami of Ohio have a 3-0 lead on OSU? Bo Jingle Bells corrects him to 5-0 lead. Tony,
forgot the
why
2-run
the Red
home run
Hawks get no respect for their 5-0 lead that ended? Tony, how did Bo Jingle Bells? What's the punchline? Final score was 76-5. Yes, that was the 2019 Ohio State Miami game. Miami jumped out to a 5-0 lead and then gave up a smooth 76 unanswered points to lose 76-5. But Tony, why is the committee not taking that 5-0 lead into account? Thanks. I'll hang up and take my answer off air.
Tom, they look at the entire picture. Again, the game is 60 minutes. It's not 6 minutes. They look at that entire picture. Should Ohio State have been down 5-0? No. And if you look back, I think that's why Ohio State did not end up ranked number 1 over LSU. You go back to those 5 points in that Miami game, and that's probably why that happened. Though the one thing that the other thing I wanted to touch on here, Michigan was asked about, and the question was, hey, Boo, is Michigan where they are because of what they've done, or because of what teams around them haven't done? And Boo's like, well, it's a combination of both. That's how you compare stuff. You can't just compare one team by looking at that one team. You have to see how they do, how they are in relation to other teams. And so there was just a nice little lesson in, this is what a comparison is. You have to look at 2 things or more. You can't just look at one thing and compare stuff. And so that was a nice nice answer there for a question that was, and you can kind of understand what they're saying, because that's what I was saying about Tennessee. Who else are you going to put there? And is Michigan at number 3 because of who else you're going to put there? I don't think so. I think they're there because they've been looking better than TCU. And if TCU hadn't trailed in all of these games, then TCU might be there because, again, the non-conference. I don't know. TCU's actually played anybody in non-conference either. That's not the Big 12 way. But when you look at those two teams, obviously Michigan has top 10 offense, top 10 defense, much more game control than a TCU. But in terms of not being 2 or 1, obviously it's still that non-conference schedule. And Boo even made mention of Notre Dame again. Like, Ohio State's win over Notre Dame is now a factor, and it will continue to be a factor. And it's something that Michigan won't have. And it's something that Michigan will, or Ohio State will have, over perhaps a Tennessee, should it come to that, or over whoever wants to compete for that number 4 spot should Ohio State lose to Michigan in a close one.
Well, and one of the things that the committee will do is they will give you credit for trying to play a good non-conference schedule. Like, if you play the Michigan non-conference schedule, you're going to get, I award you 0 points and may God have mercy on your soul. If you play Notre Dame and it happens to not be a great Notre Dame team, you're still, the committee is not stupid. They recognize you schedule these games 10 years out and you don't know what kind of Notre Dame team you're going to get. Sometimes you get college football playoff Notre Dame, and sometimes you get 4-8 Notre Dame. This team looked like it was going to be 4-8 Notre Dame, and all of a sudden now it's trending towards, top 10, top 15 Notre Dame. So this may be more of a theoretical exercise, but for TCU, you mentioned their non-conference schedule: at Colorado, Tarleton State, and at SMU. And at SMU is a rivalry game. They play for the skillet down there, TCU and SMU, but that was a relatively close one. And there's not a signature non-conference win there. And there's not really a non-conference opponent that you look at and you go, well, 5 years ago, you would have assumed that this team was going to be a top 10, top 15 kind of team. Colorado has been kind of bad for like a decade now and is exceptionally bad now. And SMU had kind of their moment in the sun, but was not ever a great team. So yeah, I don't know how much they play a much more balanced schedule. They have the Big 12 is pretty solid from top to bottom. You don't have the dreadful teams at the bottom of the Big 12, but it's still, you don't really have a signature win there either.
In terms of the Northwestern game for Ohio State, they were asked when you evaluated Ohio State, how much did the weather factor in? And they talked about it. They look at all different kinds of factors, whether it's injuries or, last year when coaches weren't there or players not being there, or whether it's a topic of discussion, just as everything else is. That way they can understand all of the factors. And so that was certainly talked about. And of course wasn't, what Ohio State did was still plenty enough to keep them at number 2. When asked about Notre Dame, Boo had to recuse himself. His brother-in-law is the lacrosse coach at Notre Dame, so he didn't want to provide any bias or anything like that. But what he was told was, Notre Dame is ranked where they are because of their wins against Syracuse, North Carolina, and of course Clemson. So that has helped them. And I don't know. They still have USC coming up in 2 weeks, maybe. That's at USC because it's late in the year and USC won't come this far yet in November, but they will eventually. But so that's going to be a tough one. And of course, if Notre Dame wins that one, they'll continue to move up. So I think Ohio State fans continue to root for Notre Dame. I know they're probably your second team anyway. So just continue on doing that.
I'm just scrolling through the bio for the Notre Dame lacrosse coach, whose name, he's a brother-in-law, so of course he does not have, I was like, oh, I wonder if he has a fun name, and then remembered, oh, it's a brother-in-law, not a brother. Like if it was like his brother's name was Erie or something like that. No, it's not. So Kevin Corrigan, that's very boring. And also his bio is extremely long and does not mention, oh, he does. Another, it says another brother, Eugene Boo, was Notre Dame's Associate Athletics Director for Corporate Relations and Marketing from 2004 to 2008. Boo now is the Director of Athletics at NC State. So Boo's name is Eugene. Please call him Eugene on the call next week. And also, you're Kevin Corrigan and Oh yeah,
I wrote
Kevin
down
Corbin.
brother-in-law, and apparently they are real brothers. I wrote down brother first, and I thought I heard brother-in-law. So, I mean,
Maybe
it sounds like
I mean, they're both legal. It's fine. It's like they're both, neither of them have like warrants or something. So they're in
really
the law.
strange.
That's
They have the same last name, and this is his brother-in-law. That'd be a little-
it is North Carolina. If one boy is named Boo, like and I know, Tom, you tried with Erie, but like it would just be some random, redneck name. Like this is Boo and this is Scud and this is, Turkey.
Skeeter.
And it's like those Skeeter, like these aren't even real words. And it's like, that's just the way we can tell everybody apart. And like grandma likes it and grandpa likes it. And so that's how they got it. And anything else? I think we're going to wrap up here at 8:30. Anything else that we haven't touched on? Any outstanding issues that need to be addressed? No? Okay.
No.
I like it that way. Want to thank you all for joining us here on a Tuesday night to discuss all kinds of college football stuff. Buckeyes still ranked number 2. If you're just tuning in, terrible time to just tune in, but you can go ahead and rewatch on the YouTube page there. So thank you all for joining us. Remember, find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. There's membership there. Become a member. Hit us up on the message board. We'd love to see you there. If you're watching on YouTube right now, go ahead and please hit the like. Go ahead and subscribe. Hit the bell to be notified when we go live and drop all kinds of videos, all kinds of interviews, and all kinds of shenanigans. So thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you guys later.